The world is remembering Pope Francis, who died overnight in Rome. And we just learned the Pontiff's cause of death was a cerebral stroke that put him in a coma and that led to irreversible heart failure. The 266th Pope is being remembered for his groundbreaking work to help the poor and the vulnerable, his outreach to the LGBTQ+ communities, and his advocacy for migrants' rights. His ideas often clashed with President Trump, who honored the Pope by lowering U.S. flags to half-staff.
He was a good man, worked hard. He loved the world, and it's an honor to do that.
Former President Biden, the nation's second Catholic president, praised the Pope's leadership, saying he commanded us to fight for peace and protect our planet from the climate crisis while advocating for the voiceless and powerless. The faithful are honoring the Pope's legacy here at home. KCAL News reporter Luzdelia Caballero is live in downtown L.A., where a mass was held this morning.
It is a day of mourning. So many devastated after waking up to the news that Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. Affectionately known to so many faithful around the world as the Pope of the people, he led with compassion, humility, and humanity. We are talking about a Spanish-speaking, soccer-loving Pope who told folks to love thy neighbor. We spoke to so many earlier today as they attended Mass at 7 in the morning, as they say that they will remember him as a Pope who was strong in faith and who gave them a sense of hope.
I feel very sad every time he spoke about the poor. And he acted as a poor. He acted as a Jesus Christ.
We kind of honor his memory by ourselves being loving and kind in our own communities.
Cardinal Roger Mahoney, the Archbishop Emeritus of Los Angeles, sharing a statement following Pope Francis's death, saying in part, "As I prepare to travel to Rome for his funeral masses, I go to help bury a friend and a brother. I go with prayers of gratitude to God for the indelible stamp which Pope Francis has made on the world and the church. We are all God's children, and we must care for each other and our common home, the earth." Archbishop Jose H. Gomez also sharing a statement following the death of Pope Francis, saying in part, "In this time of mourning, my prayer is that all of us in the church will honor Pope Francis's legacy by remembering that he called us to urgent tasks that are still not finished. We must continue our work of serving the poor, the migrant, and all who are forgotten on society's peripheries." Born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Pope Francis made history not only as the first pontiff from Latin America, but also as the first Jesuit and the first to take his papal name from St. Francis of Assisi, a saint who dedicated his life to the poor. And here at the Cathedral of Our Lady of Angels, there will be a Mass in less than an hour at 12:10, where Archbishop Gomez is expected to lead. The Archdiocese tells us that there will be a schedule coming out shortly about when rosaries will start throughout the course of the next couple of days. We'll keep you updated on that schedule. Reporting in downtown Los Angeles, Luzdelia Caballero, KCAL News.
Here's a live look at the Vatican. The late Pontiff died overnight after suffering a cerebral stroke and heart failure. We've been talking about the passing of Pope Francis all morning here at KCAL News. Former CBS Evening News anchor Nora O'Donnell takes a look at how he revolutionized the Catholic Church.
Pope Francis's impact on the Catholic Church is extraordinary. Early on in his papacy, he got the nickname the People's Pope because of his openness and his wish to include everyone in the church. His desire to reach out to ordinary people sent the bulletproof Pope-mobiles into storage. I can remember when he said, "I cannot greet people from inside a sardine can." And this really was part of his pastoral approach. It was just one of the many topics we spoke with him about last April during our rare conversation. Never before had the Holy Father done such an interview with an American broadcast network. He was then 87 years old, and we found him warm, sharp, and engaging. More than 1.4 billion Catholics look to Pope Francis, but his reach goes even further. When Pope Francis speaks, the world listens, making him an important voice on issues of war, peace, and immigration.
You talk so much about opening your heart.
Corazón cerrado se endurece.
A closed heart becomes hardened. It hardens and gets sick. It gets life sick. The heart must be open. It is true that in many people, their selfishness leads them to close up their hearts. But that can be helped by talking, discussing, helping, right? Someone who dies with a closed-up heart is a pity. They miss out on a great happiness, that of going forward with an open heart.
When you look at the world, what gives you hope?
Todo.
Everything.
Uno ve tragedias,
You see tragedies,
pero ve
but you also see so many beautiful
tantas
things.
cosas lindas. Uno ve madres heroicas,
You see heroic mothers,
hombres heroicos,
heroic men, men who have
que
hopes and
tienen ilusión,
dreams,
mujeres que miran
women who
adelante.
look to the future.
Eso a mí me da
That
mucha
gives me a lot of
esperanza.
hope.
La gente quiere vivir.
People want to live.
La gente
People
va
forge
adelante.
ahead. And people
La
are
gente es
fundamentally good.
fundamentalmente buena.
We are all fundamentally good.
Somos fundamentalmente
Sometimes we
buenos.
are a little
Por eso,
mischievous,
un poco pícaros,
sinners,
pecadores,
but the heart
pero el
is good.
corazón es bueno.
It's interesting, Pope Francis spoke about opening your heart, but he also wanted to open the church to more people with a message of inclusiveness, whether for the LGBTQ community or women. In fact, he placed more women in positions of power in the Vatican, but notably in our interview, he closed the door to allowing women to become deacons and priests.
As Catholics around the world mourn the death of Pope Francis, the Vatican is preparing for what comes next. Joining us now is Chancellor Marcelo Sarez Orso from University of Massachusetts, Boston, rather. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
So good to be with you.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know this kind of sets in motion a whole series of events that need to now take place in terms of rituals. There will now be 9 days of official mourning. Can you talk about some of the traditions observed during these days and what happens specifically today?
Well, first, of course, it's a day of profound sadness to the really billion plus Catholics. But I should also note that Francis was a pioneer in interfaith dialogue. So I'm sure that folk of good faith, of all faiths around the world, are in great, great sadness today for what he represented. So now we enter the Novemdiale. These are the 9 days of mourning, which will include daily prayers at the Vatican, the Requiem Masses, and then, of course, being Francis, he will be buried not in St. Peter's. He will be buried at the Santa Maria Maggiore, outside of the Vatican walls, a church that he visited over 100 times during his reign in the throne of St. Peter's. And in between 16 and 21 days, then we will begin the process of the conclave, the choosing of the new Pope. So today is a day of sadness, dolor y alegría is how he would like to be remembered, I think. Dolor, because we've lost such an important voice at this moment where the world is facing such enormous challenges. And alegría, joy, because he was a loving pope. He was a pope with a wicked sense of humor. I had the enormous pleasure of introducing to him governors from around the world. Recently, just last May, I introduced him to Gavin Newsom, to Maura Healey, to Kathy Hochul from our country, but also from governors and mayors from around the world. And his wicked sense of humor, just his playfulness, was so characteristic. He had joy, he had beauty, he had an enormous sense of justice. He was a pope for our times, and he will be deeply, deeply missed by folk of good faith from around the world.
Yeah, and Chancellor, speaking of that, we see the throngs of people who are mourning him this morning. For those who don't know, can you explain how do Catholics around the world typically participate in mourning a pope? And we're talking about people from local parishes to major cathedrals.
Folk will gather at churches, places of worship, to remember him, both in formal and informal ways, with prayer, with their own rituals, with the ritual sanctioned by the church, but also with the private remembrances of a pope that in his humility, in his beauty, in his kindness, touched so many of us, both through his own lived experiences, his teachings, and again, the beauty with which he connected with people in his travels. He was always on the move. He was, the Pope Mobile was always on standby. His humility, his common touch, he was the Pope of the people. He came from very humble origins. His family was working class, Italian. They had to leave the fascists in Italy, went to Argentina. He did all kinds of jobs in Argentina. He studied sciences. He went to what we would call in our country community college, studied chemistry. He was very fascinated by science. His connection with common people, I think, is what was most notable. Looking back, we gathered in a summit at the Apostolic Palace last May, and he was so, there was so much joy when I introduced him to children, the children from the UCLA lab school. I was a dean at UCLA for 10 years. We brought children to talk about building climate resilience to protect us all. And meeting the children, meeting the indigenous leaders. We brought leaders from the Amazon. We brought leaders from the Mato Grosso. Spoke about nature. You could see the old Pope and the old indigenous leaders in each other's eyes, a kind of a mutual communion about the need to build resilience, to protect us, to protect our home, to protect the most vulnerable people. So I think that people of faith, people of all faiths today, will be remembering Francis in multiple ways, private and public, in religious ways, and in their own personal, humane ways, because he was such a humane force in these troubled times.
And a true leader, really, across the world. I remember I was fortunate enough to cover his visit, a historic visit to the UN in 2015, and he did, as you said, just touch so many people. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Really appreciate you being with us to share your memories.
Well, Francis's death is hitting particularly hard in Latin America, where the Pope was born and served the church for decades.
Joining us now live is CBS News correspondent Ed O'Keefe. And Ed, Francis is originally from Argentina, so how are people there paying their respects this morning?
You know, we've heard from across this hemisphere, and it is important to point out that he was the first non-European pope in about 1,300 years. Not since the 8th century had someone outside of Europe served as pope. And in talking to cardinals and others in the church over the last several weeks, who remind us that there were a few things really that come from that. First, the fact that the church has a bit different focus in Latin America, especially a much more intimate relationship at the parish level with those that it serves, and so his sort of approach to preaching and to reaching out to the community was far different than those in Europe may have been accustomed to, which is part of why he drew criticism, especially at the start, from many in the Vatican bureaucracy. But the other thing that it did is it acknowledged that 3 of the 4 most Catholic countries in terms of the percentage of their population are on this side of the globe, Brazil, Mexico, and the United States. And so he brought that Western perspective to what had been a very European-focused, European-based religion for so long.
That's interesting.
All right. Well, Ed, Francis was known as the slum pope for his focus on the poor and the marginalized. What made him different other than that?
Well, again, where he's from, the fact that he decided not to live in the grander papal apartments, but instead in a guest home there on the Vatican grounds, had gone back right after he was elected to pay his dues, where the cardinals were staying before assuming his responsibilities. And even in things like when he came here to Washington back in 2015 and met with congressional leaders and turned to Speaker Boehner, then Speaker Boehner at the time, and said, "Please pray for me." The humility that he showed that really affected the speaker at the time, so much so that the next day the speaker announced he was stepping down because he had realized that, you know, if someone like the Pope is asking you to do something like that, then what exactly am I doing here? And should I perhaps get out of the way? So there are all sorts of examples of that humility that he exhibited throughout that we're going to hear so much about in the coming days. And there's big questions, of course, about whether the next leader will be someone like him or someone perhaps more in the mold of those that had served before him. But certainly part of his appeal to the world, even to non-Catholics, was the fact that he seemed to be so simple and approachable.
Approachable, simple, funny. What do you think his legacy will be, Ed?
That he came from this part of the world, first and foremost, that he began making some changes in terms of the church's approach to different communities. We could think, for example, of what he said several years ago about gay and lesbian people who are followers of the church. He said, you know, if they are seeking Christ, then who am I to judge? Even that simple statement, which didn't necessarily endorse you know, gay marriage, but did acknowledge them and say they are welcome and they should be here, was seen as certainly in many parts of the world as an important step. He tried to make changes in the way the church operates in terms of its finances, in terms of apologizing for the sexual abuse scandals, for how it treated indigenous children in different parts of the world, like in Canada and in other parts of Latin America. And I think we're going to see some of the changes that he implemented in the coming days, first with his funeral. He rewrote some of the rules and norms of that to make it a simpler affair. And then we'll see it reflected in those that actually come to vote in the conclave. He's named most of those who will vote, and they come from parts of the world where there hasn't been a cardinal before who was eligible. So how that shapes who exactly becomes the successor may also then become part of his legacy.
Who in the newsroom has been chosen to watch for the white smoke? Do we know yet?
There'll be a few of us that'll be watching out for it, for sure. We're putting the plans together for that, and
you are.
And that'll be fun to see for sure.
Yes, it will. Ed, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Appreciate it. And our coverage continues this morning as we honor Pope Francis after he died at the age of 88. Tributes are pouring in from all over the world, including right here in the U.S. President Trump tweeted on Truth Social this morning, saying, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May God bless him and all who loved him." Former President Biden also tweeting out that Pope Francis was, quote, unlike any who came before him. He continued by saying the Pope will be remembered as one of the most consequential leaders of our time, and further stated, above all, he was a pope for everyone. He was the people's pope, a light of faith, hope, and love. Former President Obama wrote Pope Francis was the rare leader who made us all want to be better people. He went on to say, may we continue to heed his call to never remain on the sidelines of this march of living hope. Pope Francis leaves behind an enduring legacy of acceptance and reform within the Catholic Church.
Joining us now to help us learn more about the papacy under Pope Francis is Daniel Rober. He's professor of Catholic Studies at Sacred Heart University. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being with us. Can you talk a little bit about the impact Pope Francis made on the Catholic Church in those 12 years? It seems like a short period of time when we look at some of the history of the Catholic Church. Why was he known as the People's Pope?
Sure. Well, Pope Francis, when he was a priest and a bishop and a cardinal in Argentina, was somebody who liked to be out on the street, who liked to be with the people, especially with the poor. And his image for the church was as a field hospital, as a place, an institution that would be out there serving the people, not walled up away from the people. And he really tried to live this out in the way that he would go to places like Lampedusa to be with migrants. to engage with the poor and with the marginalized in society.
One of my favorite images is when he's in the Pope mobile,
yeah.
greeting the crowds as well. While many applaud reforms the Pope made, he was also a divisive figure. Can you talk a bit about that, and as well as his critics?
Sure. Well, I would say that Francis is an interesting example of somebody who is beloved and hated for many of the same reasons. For precisely trying to open up the church to new conversations, such as acceptance of LGBT persons in a new kind of way in the church, as well as really criticizing forces around the world of what you might call the political global right on issues like migration, on issues like treatment of minorities. And these often brought him in conflict with both politicians and supporters of regimes like that.
So let's talk about, I think one of the biggest points we've heard throughout the morning is how humble he was. And his choices, how they kind of changed how people looked at the church. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, yeah, Pope Francis, he's the first pope to take the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi. And Francis of Assisi, of course, was known as somebody who gave away all his possessions, who lived kind of practically on the streets with the poor. And Francis really tried to embody this in his pontificate. His first gesture of coming out on the balcony and asking the people to bless him was an example of saying, I'm not here just to govern over you, but I'm here to be with you and to ask for your help. Again, he had all kinds of gestures in his pontificate, washing the feet of prisoners on Holy Thursday instead of priests at the Vatican, really trying to put himself out there as somebody who would be of service and of modeling a church that is of service to everyone.
And Daniel, earlier we talked about the number of cardinal contenders right now, different views, different stances. Where do you think the next pope's philosophy will stand? Will it be more progressive, conservative, or maybe somewhere in the middle?
Sure. Well, Francis himself, interestingly, even though there is kind of the stereotype that he was beloved by progressives in the church and disliked by a lot of conservatives, is somebody whose actual writings and kind of philosophy would actually probably come down somewhere between those two. And I think that complicates who his successor will be. Certainly, he's picked most of the cardinals who are going to choose his successor. There's an old Italian saying that you always replace a fat pope with a skinny pope, meaning that, in other words, you know, the kind of pope who succeeds someone is usually quite different. Not always the case. Benedict XVI was chosen as a pope of continuity with John Paul II, for example. So I think whoever they choose, the papacy will be changed by Francis. Any kind of successor is always reacting, whether in continuity, in discontinuity, in tension with their predecessor. And Francis has done things that his successor is going to have to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Daniel Rober, thank you so much for your time and insight.